Bruce, thank you very much. And we're going to get started. Tonight's presentation is on evidence-based measures to reduce boating fatalities. And we're going to, tonight we will be talking first about the scope of the problem. Okay. I hope everybody can hear me now. It looks like I'm unmuted. Bruce, we're having a little difficulties here. We're going to get started in just a second. Okay, so we're going to talk about the scope of the problem, look at some patterns in boating accidents and fatalities, and then discuss some evidence-based interventions out of those patterns that hopefully will reduce boating fatalities. All the data that we'll be discussing comes from the recreational boating statistics that are published by the Coast Guard's Office of Boating Safety, and you can look at the website for more information on those. So if we look at the scope of the problem, first, there's the good news. Boating fatalities have decreased steadily since 1991, an average of 8 deaths per year. If you're into statistics, you can look at the correlation coefficient, which is at 0.66, actually pretty good. So this is a strong evidence that whatever we're doing, we're leading to a decrease in boating fatalities. That decrease might be due to changes in education or manufacturing standards or participation, but clearly the decrease has occurred since 1991. More recently, though, the rate of decline in boating fatalities has slowed, and over the past decade, it really looks like we're not seeing any decrease at all. We do see year-to-year variability, as you can see on the plot here, but over the last decade, there's really no difference between just the average and what we're seeing. So further information is that we know roughly 4 out of 5 boaters who die while they're boating have received no formal education, but the fraction of boaters who have received education has been increasing over the past decade. If we look at the plot here, the number of people who have received NASBA-approved training, National Association of State Boating Law Administrator training, and who still died while boating has increased more than 300%, from 6% in 2010 to 20% in 2019, the last year that we have data. If we look at who's having these accidents, open motorboats account for nearly half of all boating fatalities each year in the US. And there's a general trend that the percentage of those fatalities as a percentage of the total number has been slowly increasing from about 280 in 2012 to based on the linear regression, more than 300 in 2019. You can look at the correlation coefficient there. It's not a very strong correlation, but there's clearly a general trend of increase. If we look at kayaks are the second leading contributor to boating fatalities in the US, and there's clearly a steady increase from 2012 to 2019. The reason that a lot of this data will start in 2012 is that the Office of Boating Safety changed their reporting information in 2012. They started to provide much more granular information. So from 2012 to the present, we have much better information than from 2011 and back. Now, this increase in fatalities could be due to a lot of things. And one thing that it's almost certainly due to is a nearly 300% increase in participation from 2006 to 2018. But fatalities have nearly doubled since 2012. So part of that is due to participation, part of it may be due to other things. And one of the things that it might be is a decrease in life jacket wear rates for paddlers who die. We see that there's a slight increase each year in the number of paddlers who die and are not wearing a life jacket, which means that we need to target that for educational interventions. So to summarize all of this, what we know right now is that open motorboats and kayaks account for nearly 60% of all boating fatalities. If we could stop those fatalities, we would get rid of nearly 2/3 of all boating deaths each year. There's a general trend that annual fatalities for each craft are increasing, and kayaking fatalities are showing a decrease in life jacket wear rates. The number of subjects involved in boating fatalities and have had no education is who've had education is increasing. And that's a problem because it suggests that even though they're receiving education, they're not receiving what they need to prevent them from having a fatal accident. So with that, let's take a moment to examine what we teach and how we can focus on those two craft that contribute to nearly 60% of all boating deaths. Look at all types of craft. From 2012 to 2019, collision with another recreational vessel is the most common type of accident, accounting for almost a quarter of all accidents, accounts for about 25% of injuries, but only less than 7% of deaths. Falling overboard accounts for less than 7% of accidents, less than 5% of injuries, but more than a quarter of fatalities. And capsizing shows similar numbers, 6.1% of accidents and 6.0% of injuries, but nearly a quarter of the boating fatalities. We know, if we look at all craft, that about 70% of all boating fatalities are drownings, and about 85% of drowning subjects were not wearing a life jacket, which means that we could prevent as many as 60% of all boating fatalities if we were able to get them to wear life jackets. Leading contributing factors to boating accidents, again, based on recreational boating statistics, include inattention, improper lookout, and inexperience. And if we look at both at specific types of craft, as we'll do in a moment, those are also the leading factors for open motorboats. That's not surprising because open motorboats contribute such a large fraction of all boating accidents. The leading contributing factors for fatal boating accidents include alcohol, exposure to hazardous waters. And the RBS data talks about a definition of hazardous waters, but really it's water that is moving quickly or rising quickly or has strong waves. And then inattention and inexperience. And we can think inattention leads you to do silly things or dangerous things, and inexperience leads you to not realize that you're doing those silly or dangerous things. So what we'll do next is compare the data for all boats to specific types of boats. And direct comparison can be challenging because not all the data is available for all types of craft, but what is available creates some very clear pictures that can guide us as we take measures to strive and reduce boating fatalities. So open motorboat accidents, again, contribute nearly half of all fatal accidents. And collision with recreational vessels are the most common type of accidents that they report. Capsizing and falling overboard are rare, but are still the leading causes of fatal accidents. Inattention and improper lookout are the leading contributing factors, and that makes sense. If you're not paying attention or you don't have a good lookout, you're going to run into something, and that's what leads to collision with recreational vessels. Kayaking shows a completely different profile, and that's important because when we're doing boating education, it means that we can't treat power boats the same way we might treat kayaks or other paddle craft. And if we look at a larger data set, it shows we can't treat sailboats it shows that we must treat sailboats differently from both power boats and paddle craft. So kayaks contribute about 12% of all fatal accidents over the past 8 years, and there's been a significant increase from 2012 to the present. The most common contributing factors are hazardous waters and inexperience. And essentially what that says is that people who don't have much experience don't recognize that they're going into hazardous conditions, they're exposed to them, and they don't have the ability to manage them. The biggest problem that kayaks are going to have are capsizing and falling overboard, unexpected entry into the water, leading to nearly 70% of all accident types. And most paddling accidents that are reported are fatal accidents. So capsizing and falling overboard, not surprisingly, contributing to fatal accidents. If you remember that with open motorboats, nearly 1/3 of all the accidents were collisions. That's only 6.4% with kayaks. Open motorboats report more than 1,000 accidents and injuries, and kayaks don't report anywhere near that. And a big reason for that is simply that we can do things in kayaks that would be devastating in an open motorboat and cause no damage to a kayak. Every time I take my plastic kayak out, I ground it. I'm a whitewater kayaker, so I take it over waterfalls, I run it into rocks, I capsize, all things that would be devastating in a power boat, but just barely scratch the plastic on a kayak boat. Um, because of that, those events don't get reported. The only accidents that are reported are ones that are fatal or involve significant injury and require a subject to go to the emergency room. So some implications from all of this data. First, capsizing and falling overboard are the most common fatal accidents. Both of those can occur without warning, so the importance of life jacket wear simply can't be overstated. The single greatest thing that we can do to reduce boating fatalities is make sure that everyone wears a life jacket, because the majority of boaters who die aren't doing that. I know it's a strong emphasis right now, but looking at how people are dying on the water, we need to make an even stronger emphasis. We need to look at new ways to emphasize that, new ways to instruct it, new ways to encourage people to wear their life jackets. Inattention and improper lookout are the most common contributing factors to boating accidents, which is consistent with collisions being the most common type of boating accident, which means that we need to teach people how to pay attention and how to give proper lookout. I know when I started boating, no one told me what a proper lookout meant. And as boating educators, as scouting leaders, and as auxiliarists, it's important that we figure out how to give that to people. One way to do it is to tell people to scan a certain angle in front of us. We have a bow watch that's responsible for a 120-degree arc, 60 degrees port and starboard, and then start on the port side, do a complete scan, come in closer to the boat, do a scan from starboard to port, come in even closer, port to starboard, and then work your way back out. And essentially always have your head on a swivel, always looking for things out in front of you, and then make sure that people have side and stern watches as well. Capsizing and falling overboard are rare accident types, but unexpected entry into the water is the most common type of fatal accident. We need to emphasize wearing life jackets to help manage that once we fall in the water, but the best accident is the one that never happens. So boating educators should increase emphasis on boating skills to avoid and manage capsizing and falling overboard. Alcohol consumption and exposure to hazardous waters are rare contributing factors to overall accidents, but are the leading contributing factors to fatal boating accidents. So that means that no alcohol when you're boating. Hopefully for scouts and auxiliary members that's not even a concern, but we know that we see people on the water that don't pay attention to that. And then exposure to hazardous waters, in order to get to become a better boater, we have to expose ourselves to things that are more challenging, but we need to gradually do that with excellent oversight, excellent instruction, and the ability to back off if things become more dangerous than we expect. Essentially, we need to stretch our skills without breaking them. And that leads to inexperience. It's a common contributing factor for boating accidents and boating fatalities, and it makes sense. People who are inexperienced don't know what they're getting into, they get in trouble, and they don't have the experience to manage it. So as boating educators, boating leaders, it's important that we create mentored, hands-on, on-water learning experiences to provide guidance to new boaters. There's only so much we can learn in front of a computer or in a classroom, and I know we've all spent way too much time on Zoom, way too much time in front of a computer. We have to get people out in the water, in their boats, giving an opportunity to make mistakes in controlled settings. And learn from those mistakes and make sure that they don't make the similar mistakes again. Over the past decade, and really the past 20 years, open motorboats and paddlecraft are the craft most associated with boating fatalities. And over the past decade, that paddlecraft has been kayaks. It used to be canoes. About 10 years ago, kayaks became more dangerous. they have different contributing factors to accidents and different types of accidents. So we need to recognize this and tailor instruction to our specific craft. Education for open motorboats must emphasize proper lookout to reduce risk of collision. And that's important for kayaks, but kayaks should have added emphasis on recognizing and managing hazardous waters, and in particular, managing capsize or falling overboard. As a kayak instructor, I tell my scouts, I tell my students that kayakers are boaters, paddlers are boaters, but we are also swimmers who periodically sit in boats. And if we go into the boating with the assumption that we're going to be swimming, then we'll be prepared for it. We'll be ready when it happens. It won't be a surprise. Hopefully we can prevent it by having good skills, but if it does happen, we can think about re-entering the boat, swimming to shore, doing a kayak roll, or assisting somebody with an assisted roll, using another person to help brace them up. But it's critically important that if we're going to be paddling, we expect to get in the water and we know how to mitigate and manage that. So some take-home messages for boaters and boating instructors. This is recreational boating. It's supposed to be fun, and if you're not having fun, we should figure out why or do something else. Getting hurt isn't fun, so safety is a way to make sure we do have fun. I've heard people talk about safety as a thing that makes, focusing on safety makes it not fun. For me, going to the emergency room is not a fun day. So making sure that our students and our scouts don't get hurt is a way to help them have more fun on the water. You got to wear your life jacket. You got to learn how to handle your boat and learn how to avoid and manage common problems so we have fun. We need to remember that collisions are the most common problem that we see for open motorboats, so make sure you keep a sharp lookout. We know that unexpected entry into the water is the most common problem for paddlers, so we need to dress to swim and know what to do once we do swim. And with all of these, improving your boat handling skills is the best way to prevent the problem. If you're in a power boat and you have the boat handling skills, you make a sharp watch, you're unlikely to capsize, you're unlikely to put somebody in the water, you're unlikely to run into somebody at high speed. If you're a paddler and you improve your boat skills, you're less likely to capsize, you're less likely to fall overboard, you're more likely to be able to manage the problem if you do get into more challenging waters. So finally, some resources. The two links here, the Coast Guard's Office of Boating Safety statistics, and then the American Canoe Association's resource page has a number of educational resources. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions from the floor? If you have a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself. I can try unmuting everybody, but frankly, I think you ought to unmute yourself if you have a question.
Robin, this is Bill Skelly.
Hey, Bill.
I got a question. Learning to be an instructor, teaching about boating safety classes. My issue with the class itself is I don't believe we spend enough time on kayaks and paddle, being that they're the fastest increasing problem out there. Right. We touch base and we tell people it surpassed the PWCs as the most fatalities and stuff. Is there any way that we can incorporate more training besides just taking a paddlecraft course?
Sure. So the resource link from the American Canoe Association's website has dozens of videos and lots of written material that you're welcome to incorporate into classes. Certainly incorporating this, and if you contact me offline, I can send you some resources that I've produced for my Sea Scout ship and for Auxiliarist.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering if there was any copyright infringements if we use stuff like that. So,
yeah, everything that's on the ACA website is freely available. A lot of it was actually developed through Coast Guard funding, and so it has to be publicly available. But everything, regardless of where it came from, everything that's posted there is free for public use.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. And Bill, you mentioned PWCs. doing fine on time. It's worth mentioning that personal watercraft are unusual. They're the only craft of all the ones that the Coast Guard evaluates that the most common boating death is somebody who is wearing a life jacket. And that's because they zip around at 40 knots and run into things. So they're the only craft that traumatic injury is the leading cause of death, and the only one where most of the people that die are wearing a life jacket.
I see that Kurt has his mic on.
Yes, I have a question about the death rate for kayaks.
Mhm.
Kayaks are so numerous and there's such a high rate of participation
Mhm.
in determining the death rate. Is that taken into account?
So the death rates for all craft are just reported in raw numbers per year. We can calculate that as a percentage of participation. It's not exactly straightforward because the data comes from different sources, but the actual fatality numbers are raw numbers of deaths per year.
It doesn't help to fully understand it, because if you've got, so many kayaks out there and so many people kayaking,
Mhm.
like you have 10 times as many kayaks out there as open motorboats. If you
Yeah,
had the same fatality rate, it would be 10 times more,
right.
just because of a large number.
Right. So we know that there are roughly 11 million kayaks on the water, and we know that the death rate for kayaking is about 90 per year right now. If we compare that to registrations for power boats, the death rate for open motorboats actually is quite a bit higher. There are about 12 or 14 million registered power boats. The question then becomes how many people are on each power boat. And then the statistics become even more challenging because you have to figure out how many hours are you participating. We'd ideally like to have that in accidents per boat per participant hour. The Coast Guard has not been able to get it down that granular, and no one else has either. So right now, the best we can do really is look at the raw numbers of deaths per year and recognize that participation is going to impact that, but hopefully education and regulatory agencies, regulatory actions will also help with it.
I'm also a big proponent of checklists, prior to
Mm-hmm.
leaving the dock. How important do you think that is?
When I teach paddling, I remind everybody that they have a hand. And as a whitewater paddler, I pull up my hand and I need a boat, I need a helmet, I need a life jacket, I need a paddle, and I need a skirt. And I've got a checklist right there for everything that I need. And then I'll use my other hand and go through a checklist for that. But yes, every skilled paddler uses a checklist. And I think when we're teaching people, it is very important to give them that checklist to focus on the things that they're going to need most often.
And I would
Thank you.
maintain that that's an important thing to impart to all boaters. When I get underway on my sailboat, I have a getting underway checklist that I go through to make sure that, have I checked the levels on the fluids in the engine, what is the state of the lifelines, and so on and so forth. It's easy to forget things, and
Right.
by going through the checklist, it helps to ensure that everybody has their life jackets on,
Right.
that you're prepared for whatever you can reasonably expect to happen.
And for paddlers, that checklist often starts the night before the trip, because it's easy to get to the water and realize that you left a critical piece of equipment at home. If it's a 15-minute drive, that's not a big deal. But if it's a 3-hour drive to the river or to the lake, somebody's not going boating that day. Be happy to answer any other questions. Well, Bruce, I believe we'll have this online, and I'll be happy to share the PowerPoint with anybody that would like it. This was distributed through the auxiliary. This was based on a presentation that was supposed to be delivered at NACON in August, but none of us went to that because of COVID. So it should be easily available.
I've recorded this. It's going to take my computer a little bit of time to convert it into a format that other computers will be able to use. But I'll post it by on AuxScout Wiki by sometime probably tomorrow afternoon.
Okay. I'll also, if anyone is really interested in the data behind this, I'm working with some other ACA instructors on a much larger data set. We're doing the same type of analysis for open motorboats, kayaks, canoes, and personal watercraft. Those craft account for about 75% of all boating fatalities, and the risk factors for those, the types of accidents and the contributing factors also apply to the other 25%. That should be out either in an ACA or a Coast Guard publication in the next few months.
Okay. Well, unless there are other questions, I'd like to thank Robin for an excellent presentation this evening. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming. If you have ideas for future workshops that you'd like to see us present, please drop me a note and we'll see what we can do to make it happen. Next Sunday, we're doing a repeat on the introduction to Sea Scouts and introduction to AuxScouts. And then a week from tomorrow, we have a panel discussion on best practice techniques for recruiting youth to the Sea Scout program. We have 4 great presenters from the 4 different BSA regions. So all of them are at 9 o'clock Eastern time. Look at either the AuxScout Facebook page or AuxScout Wiki for login information. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.